Today's session is on a topic that I have to confess has been really vexing for us. We've looked at scaling across a wide range of areas and sectors. We've looked, for example, at scaling in agriculture and scaling in education and scaling in health and scaling nutrition solutions and climate change and so on. Youth employment, which in some ways cuts across all of those issues, has been a particularly stubborn problem from a scaling point of view. Stubborn in the sense that we've heard over the years some really exciting interventions that help people, obviously, in the way it prepares them for activities or for the job force, but nothing that really sounds like a breakthrough, nothing that really sounds like a new, different way to change the equation. And it's desperate. I mean, I'm not saying this for melodrama. It's genuinely desperate. If you look at the data around the youth bulge and you say, what the heck are all those young people going to do? And you think about not only the human cost, but the political cost of not having an adequate solution to that problem. You begin to get a flavor of just how important this issue is. We could spend our time talking about why it's been particularly challenging to find breakthroughs on this, but I want to suggest to you that at least one of the things is the way we do education and the way we do employment. If you think about education, basically, we do education the same way Aristotle did. We put 25 young people in a classroom with somebody in the front, and they lecture to those people, and people take notes and they take tests, and then they eventually graduate with credentials. And it hasn't gotten one bit more efficient over the 2,500 or 3,000 years that we've been trying to do it that way. Similarly, if you look at the nature of the jobs, basically people have been replaced, not added to, in terms of the workforce of late. We find jobs disappearing at least as quickly as they're being created. So both what we're training for and how we're training haven't kept pace for the most part with problems. Today, we're going to talk about what I think is the most hopeful conversation we've had on this topic, about genuinely possibilities for breakthroughs. I don't think we're just being polite or optimistic. I think we're talking about some genuine possibilities for a breakthrough on this, and we couldn't have a better panel for doing that. I'm going to introduce them in a sentence. Their bios are available. They're long and they include words I had to look up in the dictionary. But I can tell you, these are two very, very impressive people. Dr. Hisham Kassab is a product management lead in the private technology sector for AI solutions with a PhD in data science from MIT and a genuine subject matter expert on this issue of AI and its applications. And Dr. Jennifer DeBoer is an associate professor of engineering at Purdue and the director of practice for education and youth for Purdue's Applied Research Institute. Again, this is their day job, trying to figure out solutions to problems just like this. I'm going to say just one more thing by way of introduction, and then I'm going to hand over to Hisham and to Jennifer to present three, I think, really interesting cases. And then we're going to back up and try to use those cases to discuss these issues more broadly. Okay, so we're going to be talking about this issue from the point of view of what you might think of as three elements or three pillars that are really involved in this interrelationship between IT and AI on the one hand and youth employment on the other. So first of all, what we're calling job disciplines here, which are what are the jobs themselves? And we're going to argue to you that there's a whole new category of jobs for young people, ones that not so far the people we're most concerned about are not getting adequately trained to fill. But there's a real job category. It's not just job displacement, it's job creation. And having people with the skills for those new jobs is critical. Secondly, we're going to give you some examples of what we're calling job matching, which is maybe the job is in Iowa and the person is in Yemen. Increasingly, it's possible to make that work. And similarly, maybe they're both in Iowa, but the person and the job didn't know about each other, and trying to match those up in a way that really is possible and makes sense. So we're going to talk about job matching. And finally, we're going to talk about mentoring and training, the way people are prepared for jobs. So is there a game changer in that, both in terms of the quality of that preparation and in terms of the technology of providing that preparation? So three pillars, they kind of weave their way through the three cases we're going to be talking about, but we're going to try and draw those out as much as we can and we'll come back to them again in the questions. We'll start with case number one. It's going to be presented by Hisham. Over to you, Hisham.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So the first case study is really a new twist on an old theme. Basically, we want to find job opportunities for young STEM MENA workers, specifically focused on the area of the MENA region, rather, and have trying to find job opportunities for them in large corporations, developed corporations, and developed countries in North America and in Europe. So next slide, please, Gabby. So this is an initiative that is spearheaded by Jabi Consulting. It is in the advanced planning stages, and we're on the cusp of piloting it in some countries in the Middle East. Again, the idea is, the vision for this is to have local work and reward remote employment. There are really two kind of enabling pillars for remote work today. The first one is technological, right? So high-speed internet allows us to remote workly across the world. And I know internet speed is not necessarily equal in different regions of the world, but even the worst internet speeds are sufficient today to allow remote work. And then on top of that high-speed internet, you also have some applications that are very enabling or empowering of remote work, such as Zoom, such as Teams, which you are on today. Then you have SharePoint, Google Suite, Jira, Confluence. All of these enable collaborative work to be done remotely. And then the second part of it is the culture. Today, there is a wide acceptance of remote work, and that, it was a bad thing that happened to us, but in a way, one of the bright spots or one of the bright outcomes of it, that I'm referring to COVID, is that now there's a much wider or a wide acceptance by corporations and by culture in general and society in general for remote work. And you can remain highly, and actually that experiment has proven that we can have highly productive workforces, even if they work remotely, not necessarily in every job discipline or every job family, but certainly in the job family of software development. And it has become very common today, and I experienced that myself directly, for teams to work across different international time zones. And I can say specifically for me, and as an example, I am based in the Eastern United States, and I work with teams in China, and that's exactly 12 hours different. So my day is their night, and their night is my day, and but it still works. So this is something that has become very common today. Next slide, please. So what I just mentioned before is an enabling, like technology and enabling kind of mindset of remote work, acceptance of remote work, and it being enabled by technology. But now, if we want to have remote workers in MENA delivering value and being highly productive for corporations in North America and Europe, there are a few things that they need to kind of go through. And this is where this initiative is focused, is how do we make AI optimize and maximize the productivity of youth workers in the MENA region. So the first element of it is, hey, these people live and have studied for the most part in their home countries, right? And their home countries, they have diaspora members in North America, again in Europe. And those diaspora members can provide valuable mentorship to the mentees. Perhaps some of it is hard skills, but a lot of it is soft skills, right? And how do you manage your career? How do you manage your development, etc. So we have mentors or potential mentors from the diaspora community in North America and Europe. We have mentees who are seeking that mentorship, and we have a huge gap between them. How do we match the right mentor with the right mentee? And this is kind of where AI comes in as a first application of AI, is to do the right matching of the right mentor with the right mentee. And we can look at attributes such as what are their home countries, what are their languages, what are their genders, what is the subject matter that needs to be mentored on, et cetera, et cetera. So we can take all these attribute inputs into an AI system, and the AI system can find the right mentor for the right mentee. And by right, I mean the one that's going to deliver the best bang for the buck in terms of that mentorship relationship. So in the interest of time, I'm going to speed through the slides a little bit. So next slide, please. However, one of the biggest impediments to mentorship, to mentor-mentee relationship is scalability. it's a one-to-many relationship. You have one mentor and many mentees. And at some point, this mentor who does have a day job does not have enough time to mentor a large number of mentees. And that is kind of the ceiling that we hit with this relationship. But this is, again, where AI can come into play, and especially with the newer and the most recent advances in AI in terms of generative AI. So the idea here is, can we use AI to look at live sessions between mentors and mentees, learn from these live sessions, understand how the mentor thinks and how they deliver their messages, and basically create an AI bot replica of that mentor, and replicate that bot across many mentees. And all of a sudden, that mentor, instead of being able to do a live session mentorships rather with maybe 10 different mentees, now we can multiply them infinitely, and they can do any number of mentees can benefit from the mentorship of that mentor. Again, this is done through the combination of generative AI and kind of using and training on live sessions that mentor provides to various mentees, and using AI, we can replicate that many times over. Next slide, please. Great. And another kind of inefficiency that exists today is that if you think about the training that workers have to go through, for subject matter, specifically actually for like technical subject matter, there's probably reels and reels of footage, of training footage out there, whether it's online videos or whether it's basically online slides. But these are generic training programs that are intended to kind of serve everybody, and they're not personalized or specific to any particular person. Again, AI over here can take a person, an individual, right, and understand their strengths, their weaknesses, the language, how they best receive information. And then on the other side of the coin, it can take that large amount of training footage, not just edit it the right way, but also use generative AI capabilities to maybe add a little bit of content here, a bit of content there, all to say that you can take this kind of corpus of raw training footage and customize it and personalize it to the trainee in such a way that not only do you minimize the time that's required for that trainee to be on that training course, but also to deliver the information to them in the way that they best understand and best absorb. Next slide, please. And I know this working with tech teams all over, that if you're a software developer, and I sorry to kind of go back to that example, it's the easiest example to look at. A lot of times you're developing and then you run into a problem and you don't know how to solve it. There's a bug or there's a particular thing that's vexing, that's becoming a little bit a challenge to overcome. And the way you solve it is by asking the person next to you, hey, how do I solve this? And then in a remote setting, you can do the same thing, but you can also maximize the productivity and the success of that peer support. So AI, again, can look across the region, look across the peers who are available to you remote, find the right peer person to kind of provide the best advice on how to overcome that challenge. So I'm not going to belabor this, it's kind of obvious, but the idea is to how to find the right peer for the right moment to solve the right challenge that you're working on right now. Next slide, please. And then finally, communication. So I have to admit, it took me a while to understand this. Yeah, we all speak English, and I'm based out of the United States. We all speak English in the United States. However, when you go into the corporate world, there's a particular way you use that language. There's a particular corporate language in terms of tone, in terms of the words you use. So if you think about a remote worker in the MENA region, for them to fit into that corporate culture, for them to kind of be not to stick out in any way, they have to kind of conform to the cultural norms of that corporate culture. And the first thing that comes up is the communication. There is a certain, like, as I said, there's a certain choice of words, there's a certain tone that you use in your written communication, even in your spoken communication. So the idea is, can we inject AI, kind of be a man in the middle? If I send an email that says, hey, this is really important to me, the AI can look at, okay, who's the sender, who's the recipient, how can we maybe suggest a different language that would A, communicate that message better, and B, be more conforming to the kind of norms of communication. So this is a simple, actually trivial example here, but I can change the sentence of this is very important to me to this is top of mind. And that's kind of how people might phrase that sentiment in a corporate culture. Again, AI can play a role over here to kind of, quote unquote translate the communication in such a way that you become much more, me as a kind of remote worker become much more kind of part of the fabric of the corporate culture that I'm working in. So what we went over here, went through over here, some just examples of how AI can facilitate and make the worker more successful in a corporate setting that is inherently foreign to them, right? They're working in their home country, but they're working for a corporation that is has a different culture. It's a different culture regardless, even in the same country, because corporate cultures is different from your mainstream culture, but also across continents or across the seas, that's going to differ. So AI is going to help you kind of be, as a worker, be most productive and most integrated into that culture. So those were some of the examples. Again, this is a case study that is in the late stages of planning and on the cusp of being piloted. And it's nothing new, I know that, but also it's new in the sense that AI makes a lot more, it makes many elements of it or many facets of it more possible today than it was even just 5 years ago. So I'll leave it there. And I guess we can take some questions at the end. But thank you, Larry. I appreciate it. I can hand it off to Professor DeBoer. Right.
By the way, if any of you want to drop questions or comments into the chat, please feel free to do that. We'll open it up for questions toward the end. Jennifer?
Great, thanks. And thanks all for being here. I'm going to go briefly through two very specific case studies. They each touch on the three pillars that Larry outlined, the types of jobs or the disciplines that we're training folks in, job matching, and the mechanism by which that job training is happening. But really, the first case study here, case study 2 on the Jordan Cyber Academy, highlights the first two pillars the most clearly. So the specific disciplines that students are getting trained in, the specific types of jobs, and the job matching. So we can go to the next slide. This is a program that was launched in October 2023 in partnership between Purdue University, Purdue's Applied Research Institute, the Princess Samaya University of Technology, and the U.S. Embassy in Jordan. And it was created as a direct response to a study tour that folks from Jordan took to the U.S. That included a number of Jordanian cybersecurity leaders from different sectors. And their main takeaway was that folks in Jordan needed to have more exposure at an earlier age to the variety of cyber careers. So this program was launched as an initial pilot with two main objectives. Really giving Jordanian youth foundational cyber skills training and giving the cohort exposure to the variety of cyber career pathways. You can see there's sort of an initial virtual training, in-person boot camp, and then a follow-up virtual exploration of cybersecurity pathways with an eye towards really bringing in academia as well as industry for careers in new types of jobs and the ability to make informed choices about matching with those jobs. You can go to the next slide, Gabby. The curriculum, again, with the goal of giving 50 young people foundational cyber skills training, and then giving the cohort exposure to the over 35 recognized pathways in cyber careers. We began recruitment in December of 2023. Speaking to the challenges of the youth bulge and youth unemployment that Larry alluded to, it's probably no surprise that we had nearly 1,000 applications just for 50 spots. And through a detailed but challenging selection process, we were able to select students from every governorate in Jordan. The curriculum, again, covers different topics that are more recent additions to the technical workforce, things like the nature, scope, and urgency of cybersecurity landscape, cryptography, cybersecurity threats and precautions, and both individual and enterprise level systems management. Again, 3 phases, really covering foundational knowledge, again, in that first pillar in new jobs, and then transitioning after the boot camp to thinking about what are the new ways to match with those new jobs. Go to the next slide. Industry mentors play a number of important roles in this job matching arena. They can serve as job shadow hosts, so hosting a small group of participants, maybe 5 people max, at a given company for half-day sessions during the in-person boot camp. So one way of matching students to jobs as they're exploring careers. Industry collaborators serve as career pathway speakers for the virtual training sessions as students are starting to get prepared to go into their new careers. They can serve as virtual mentors, so kind of mirroring some of the suggestions that Hisham had in his case study for participants following the boot camp. They can provide scholarships, so getting certification in specific industry credentials is one area where industry can actually invest in the types of credentialed skills that they would need to see from their own workforce. And then over the long term, really to meet the needs of Jordanian industry and the jobs that are needed by industry, there needs to be a more kind of comprehensive and broader mandate for the school like this. As one example of the industry's eagerness to invest in this, after hearing the kickoff dialogue, a private sector donor offered 600 scholarships specifically to Jordanian women. And so all of the women in the Cyber Academy have been given the opportunity to get additional industry credentials depending on the field that they choose to go into. So we can go to the next slide. The other case study that I wanted to bring in is sort of a different flavor of the work that we do at the Purdue Applied Research Institute. So this is really focused on research that we've conducted on an open online course that has transformed into a MicroMasters credential. So this is MIT's MFin, Masters in Finance, MicroMasters. You can go to the next slide. This is 5 courses offered on the edX platform. If you remember, this is one of the early massive open online course providers. They've evolved to have a number of different types of trajectories and business models for the types of learning and training that are demanded both by learners and by industry. And in this case, there are a number of students who are actually professionals, working professionals who are going back to get certification, in some cases actually supported by their employers. This MicroMasters credential comprised 5 courses. Each of the courses was 12 weeks each. You see, we had tens of thousands of students enroll from nearly every country in the world, with the median age being 29. You can go to the next slide. So again, just to give a snapshot of who the students are, as we think about the different mechanisms by which we can, take advantage of new technology tools to scale learning and opportunities for youth. We can see that the youth who are taking part in opportunities like the MicroMasters program, predominantly male, so women still underrepresented. Predominantly folks who have a college degree already, and as the previous statistics alluded to, a number of folks are actually continuing education professionals. If you look at the top 10 countries, not only do you have students from the US and former British Commonwealth countries, so English-speaking experience, we also have students from a variety of other countries, so Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, as some of the top participants in this combined, mini MicroMasters that has things like finance, financial accounting, mathematical methods for quantitative finance, and markets modeling. We can go to the next slide. So beyond the course itself and the mechanism of the edX platform, within it, the structure was able to take advantage of new ways of course design in both learning materials and learning assessments. So the course platform included both a modular structure and modular feedback tools taking advantage of essentially intelligent tutoring type systems as the back end to support individualized student learning, even when you have a course population of 65,000 plus. So the modular structure, for example, you might have students who they're taking module 5, and if they take a short concept question that identifies an area of conceptual understanding that students are not as strong in, they'll be suggested to go back and review certain material and then take another crack at the concept questions to ensure that they have the knowledge covered before they move on. And as an example of the different kinds of assessment tools that are used and that rely on new areas of technology and educational technology structures, these include things like automated assessments that can provide immediate feedback and in particular immediate corrective feedback to learners. We know that this is more impactful for student learning and retention. Assessment tools that include detailed analytics, largely for instructors, but for students as well, to see areas where they're performing well and areas where they may need to review their understanding, and having assessment tools that can ensure consistent grading across problem sets. On the other hand, some of these assessment tools, just to be transparent, we noted they are costly to develop, and it's much more difficult to ask open-ended questions. But they do allow for things like randomization, conditional grading, and adaptive hints. So we can go to the next slide. I think those are the two case studies, and I wanted to kind of finish with two different ways of thinking about the role of integrating internships and kind of the runway into the workforce, university internship programs, as kind of cross-cutting themes across our case studies. So on the one hand, we have youth job seekers around the world. University internship programs serve as a scaffold across the valley of death where we might lose hidden gems around the world, talented individuals who may not, without some of the digital technologies that we have today, be able to be matched to corporations looking for their talent. I'm actually calling in from Kenya as part of a program that I've been working on for the past month or so. And the Kenyan president, during his visit to the US, pointed out that they're investing a lot in programs like those that Hisham and I have described here. And he cited one of the examples that continued to come up for him. That was someone from rural Kenya who's now working as a machine learning analyst for a German company because they had those skills, they developed them, and then they could connect. An opportunity that wouldn't have been otherwise feasible without this structure. The other illustrative example is youth learners learning within the university ecosystem and being expected to immediately jump into authentic industry practice. University internship programs provide that overlap and integration between the learning environment and the practice environment, where students can start to see what the corporate culture, what the expectations and norms of the workforce would be, while still in a place where it's safe to fail and learn and make mistakes and get feedback. So again, just thinking about two different bridges for how do we get there for students going from formal learning environments into the workforce. So with that, I think I'm going to throw it back to Larry to take us through a few questions and hopefully some of the productive discussion from the audience gathered here. Thank you.
Thank you both for a little glimpse into the future. I have to admit, I'm happy I lived this long. I mean, it's really, there's some days I would happily be in the last century, but this is one of the days when I'm happy to be in this one. Let me just say a little bit by way of connecting this to the original proposition. I mean, if we start with this notion that we've got a big problem on our hands in that there are large numbers of youth who have no jobs at all or are not connecting effectively with the jobs that are there. And that being born in a developed country is a huge advantage in terms of getting access to a job. And we're trying to at least even that out a little bit, both for economic productivity reasons and also for equity reasons. Let's kind of dig down on some pieces of this. So one of the things you both kind of incorporated, but didn't really speak too directly to, I want to focus on a little more, which is who should be paying for this? We've talked, the three of us have been talking a little bit about the role of international development agencies and the role of private industry, and of course, the role of the learners and job seekers themselves. As we look at these different functions, getting trained, getting mentored, getting placed, what's the business model for all of that? Maybe I'll start, Hisham, with you first on that.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. You're right. Who's paying for this? And I think we can look at this as kind of two phases. The initial phase is the investment phase, right? And like any kind of initiative or whether it's in the public sector or in the private sector, it does require investment. And for some of these initiatives and these case studies in particular, I think the nature of them makes it such that the investment is not going to necessarily come from the private sector. It has to come from the public domain, from the international development community domain. And by the way, and I want to kind of really emphasize the point that any successful company you see today or any successful initiative you see today does require that initial VC kind of investment, whether it's Meta, Google, Microsoft, all of them require this. But once we kind of create the value, and then it can be self-sustaining. So the second part, which I think maybe is what the question was more kind of targeted towards, is like once it's up and running, how does it pay for itself? So I think there's at least three sources of revenue. Professor DeBoer kind of mentioned the internship program through the universities. And what I really like about it, and I'm a huge proponent of it, is that the universities today, they already have relationships with corporations, and they place their students to with corporations through their career offices. I know my first internship came through my university's careers office. And they don't do it necessarily as kind of like a charity kind of thing. The corporations pay for that. So the first source of revenue is the corporations who are receiving these employees and having these employees work for them. They're going to provide a finder's fee. Whether that finder's fee is, we pay a certain amount of money per placed employee, or we have a general subscription type of a fee with the university, and and that subscription allows us to have access to these interns and potential employees as well. The idea is that the corporation that is benefiting from the value provided by the employee will make a payment. I think the second revenue source is going to be from the graduates of these different programs, right? They're giving back. The same way it's customary here in the United States, I don't know how customary it is across the world, but it's customary for graduates and alumni of a university to give back to that university. They value the education that they got, they value the value that they receive from being in that environment, and they want to give back to it to the next generation. And I think the third source of revenue are the local governments. Professor DeBoer, I think this is an excellent example of the Kenyan president, as Professor DeBoer said, highlighting the value that these programs are providing to their workers. So if we think of a setting where now the work is local, and therefore the money that is earned by that individual is being spent locally and is being infused into and diffused into the local economy, the governments are benefiting from this, right? It's the tax base, et cetera, is growing. And therefore there's an interest for the government, whether it's the national, local government, to keep those programs running. So there's probably a potential for those governments as well to fund these initiatives.
Jennifer?
Yep, and I would just add from the perspective of the someone who sits in the university side, I think in the payment, there's a value to industry in investing, almost being like the VCs early on in the individuals who are going to work within their companies. And I think the traditional tension between the university and industry is that industry says, oh, you're sending us, folks who are not ready to do what they're supposed to do. You need to do more training within the university. And it really needs to be a more integrated approach from both of the sectors. because we have a number of examples at Purdue where industry puts in a smaller amount of money to seed students working on authentic projects from industry. And that allows, for a lower investment than company X would pay for, the orientation and onboarding of employees, they can help students be prepared within the university setting, but actually then better set them up for job seeking and job creation once they leave the university.
Yeah.
So I think that's just the example that I would add.
I could keep going with that one because I've got a lot of follow-up questions. Maybe others will pose them in the chat, but I want to ask you a different one, which has to do with numbers. You both alluded to this in your comments. Some of what you were talking about is how to do the job training, job matching task better. But in a few cases, you talked about how to do it for substantially larger numbers of people. Hisham, you talked about substituting bots, for example, at some point into the mentoring relationship. Jennifer, you talked about MOOCs and some other sorts of tailored programs where it's not the individual instructor that's doing the tailoring, it's machine learning that's helping to do some of that. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I wonder if we're talking about this big youth bulge and not only a mismatch, but an underconnection between the supply and the demand. Do you see in all this prospect for a significant breakthrough in all of that, or is this essentially doing the task we're already doing and just doing it better in terms of quality? Let me start with you, Jennifer, on that.
Yeah, I think maybe this isn't the answer that we want to hear, but I think it probably has to be incremental because there's no sense in, and I don't think that we're at the point where there will be a fundamental shift unless it's done right. So I think that, starting in a way that we're really ensuring that the use of machine learning and AI continues to be equitable while being effective. And that doesn't mean, keeping tiny numbers. The MIT MicroMasters is tens of thousands of students, but some of the early MOOCs were absolutely, we're guilty of exacerbating inequalities rather than trying to mitigate them. So I think it is probably more sustainable and will address some of the major concerns around equity if it is an incremental, really doing using these tools in targeted ways to be more efficient, but also to ensure that we're growing and creating more opportunities in a reasonable way.
You agree with that, Hisham?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I understood the question correctly, if I didn't, I apologize. But I mean, to me, it's both, right? I think you mentioned, I think you talked about quality and then scale, and I think technology. And I hate to kind of keep going back to AI. It's because it's an overused buzzword for sure, but it does have value, right? And then the generative component, the generative AI, the large language model advancements that we have seen in the last couple of years really are a game changer. So a long way of saying, I think it's both, right? So I think you can enhance quality because now you can enhance the ability to personalize what the service or the education or the knowledge being delivered. And once you go digital, that's the beautiful thing about digital. It can be multiplied and replicated almost infinitely. So you can scale accordingly. And I agree with Professor DeBoer that you have to be iterative about it, right? And maybe this is a question also that forgive me if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, but Yambura had asked is how do we demonstrate this? And I think you have to demonstrate this incrementally. As a product manager, there's a concept that's called minimum viable product, MVP. You basically go to market with something, right? It's not the full thing. It's not what you envision how it's going to be 10 years from now. But you go with some initial value that is intended to demonstrate value. I'm overusing that word, but to demonstrate the value.
Yeah.
And once people kind of see that value, then you start to increment and enhance and enlarge it and build, iterate, and add layers to it. So I think that I agree with you. It does provide both quality and scale, and we have to be incremental about it because we have to you can't build it and they will come kind of, it won't be that kind of scenario. You have to demonstrate the value. It has to be tangible. People have to see it. So you start small and you build on it.
I'm not really pushing back, but I want to end this little question with a challenge, because I know that the thing that draws people to this issue is not only a hope, but a fear. And the hope, of course, is in improving the quality of what people are doing and improving the equity by spreading it more broadly and more evenly across the globe and so on. But I think the people who are most motivated are looking at these huge numbers of young people who are not lining up with opportunities. And that somewhere along the line, even as we do just the kind of incremental stuff that you're talking about, we're going to have to push ourselves on the issue of are there legitimate breakthroughs we can really work towards that would substantially increase the access and the numbers of people who are getting training for tomorrow's jobs and are getting placed in those jobs? Because otherwise we'll still be doing something good. We'll be helping the people we help. But from a scaling point of view, we're going to be left with a monumental problem that we've not yet addressed. Anybody want to respond to my response?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're not wrong, but I think we do need to be careful about scaling and getting numbers while still leaving even larger numbers behind.
I think that's right. That's exactly the flip side.
Yeah. So I think really growing incrementally in a way that can still ensure localized knowledge sharing, building on local knowledge, and supporting local economies. So, for example, I was in more rural Western Kenya earlier this week, and I think some of the models that we're talking about could be relevant, but then ensuring that scaling is applicable to the local community. So, for example, the credentials and types of jobs that are created don't just benefit a German company, but credentials that can be recognized by the local TVET authority or the local educational authority or the local job market, and that there is space and support and even investment from the public sector or the more local public and private sectors in opportunities in Eldoret, rather than having the only opportunity be for the few elite students who get this kind of training to be working for German companies or whomever else.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, just broadening for 1 second from our conversation today to the overall community of practice, one of the things that we've been preoccupied with is the fact that sometimes in focusing on an innovation, in this case, I'm calling the training methodologies and the mentoring methodologies the innovation, we forget about the systemic changes that would be necessary in order for those things to be applied broadly. So what I hear and what you're saying, Jennifer, is not just look for the technology of how to go big. We need to look at the system implications of what that requires and who would need to do what if it's not only going to be big, but it's going to be good and it's going to be fair.
Yep.
Hisham, do you want to say something?
I agree with everything above. I just will add one more thing, that incremental doesn't equal slow, right? So incremental means that you want to keep building and proving the success. But as we've seen with digital technologies over the last couple of decades or so, once you hit a certain critical mass point, it explodes. It becomes a hockey stick, right? So the idea is, again, incremental is not slow. Incremental is there to kind of prove success. Once you kind of reach a certain critical mass, it will spread like wildfire anyways.
That's right. I've got one more, and then if people have questions, I'm going to pause and check for that. I want to ask about credentials. A couple of you mentioned programs that involve credentialing of one sort or another, either university credentialing or some job standard or approved, accepted standard of performance on things. Could you kind of riff a little bit more on the issue of credentials and how that relates to people's motivation for participating in the programs and what you've seen around the issue of credentialing? Hisham, you want to start on that?
Sure.
And then I'll go to Jennifer.
Okay, I'll go. First of all, I think the biggest success for these programs is people finding employment, right? I think some people obsess about certificates, what have you, but ultimately the bigger goal or the more effective goal, the more impactful goal is finding employment. So to me, credentialing is important from one perspective. One perspective is that I'm looking from the employer perspective, that how do I know that this person coming in has what it takes to be an effective employee? And that's why I go back to Professor DeBoer's internship program. I think it's great because of two things. One, internships are low-cost investments by companies to find out whether that person works for us or not. So you're bringing in a person for summer. It's an experimental trial phase. If it works out, great. If it doesn't work out, that's fine. We didn't invest as a company. We didn't invest all that much. We just had to pay them an intern salary for 3 months or something like this. Now, the other part of it is that I think the universities, as they present potential internship candidates to the companies, they would have to validate their ability. They have to vet them somehow. So I do feel that any person who's presented by a university as an internship candidate to a corporation will have been not credentialed, but kind of credentialed in the sense that we have to know that this person is up to par. Now, once you are in the corporate setting, once you're an employee, then the corporation, and I know, Larry, you and I had spoken about this earlier, corporations are interested in that person attaining certification and trainings. So, for example, I have been, even though I'm not an engineer, I actually got an AWS practitioner certificate because my company is interested in upskilling in that regard. And I would love to have this on my resume as well. So once you're in the employment, I think companies will help employees gain those credentials and those certifications, and it's a mutually beneficial equation.
Jennifer?
Yes. So I think the credentialing piece, it can be an initial motivation, but the way, again, I tend to think about things from the systems perspective, because you see places where people can fall out of the system, and I think that illustrates some of the areas where there are cracks, right? So as an example, we've done a lot of work with refugee communities in Jordan and in northern Kenya on learning engineering and STEM foundational skills. And the credentials from Purdue, so from the Purdue continuing education units that they would get, those were very motivating initially. Those will get you through the initial training. However, to get you across that bridge, that kind of bridge from the learning to the industry environment, there needs to be recognition of those credentials by local systems, and that includes local public systems, the governments that would accredit formal or semi-formal learning. It needs to be recognized by companies. So it's a currency, right? The credentials become a currency, and they can be an initial motivation, but unless that currency is accepted by the places where you're trying to spend it, it becomes useless. And in fact, it becomes a frustration. So that would be the thing I would say for us to keep in mind. We have some of the solutions, we have some of that currency, but we need to work out the translation and the acceptance of those credentials in a variety of systems.
Very thoughtful answers. Thank you both. Let me ask if anyone in the audience has questions. If so, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll have you come off mute. All right, I'm going to ask one more while we watch and see if people do that. I want to go one step deeper, if I could, on the issue of equity. That clearly is not the motivator for companies, but it is the motivator for governments and for international development agencies. Do you think is the value proposition for companies simply they can get the same talent for less money by sourcing it more widely? Is that what the argument sounds like? And when you make the argument to development agencies, what does that argument sound like? Jennifer, why don't you start on that one?
Yeah, I think the optimistic side of me, and from some of the conversations I've been having here in Nairobi, I'd say I'm pleasantly surprised and can check some of my assumptions about the motivations for industry too. I think there is interest by companies in equity as well. Now, that is still seen as, I think, some of the profit motive. So, for example, having a more diverse set of employees, people who have experienced different languages, cultures, and life experiences will bring a broader set of solution spaces to any given to any given project or team. So it's not necessarily a justice-oriented mindset, but kind of from the operational function of having diverse viewpoints, that equity concern is there, as well as, right now wanting to ensure that they're seen as doing good work. So I think that can be there as well. I think that said, I think some of the things that we need to keep in mind are how we, again, design the systems for people from a variety of backgrounds to have all of the scaffolds necessary to be able to learn different types of jobs and to have the opportunities for different kinds of job matching. Yeah.
Hisham, answer this if you would, but from the perspective of the case you were talking about. So trying to take young people and matching them with IT jobs in the US and the developed world. What's the motivation for everybody involved?
Oh, I think there's, even from an economic theory perspective, there's a motivation here because you're doing optimal allocation of resources, right? A company doesn't really care about the nationality of the worker. It cares about highly productive, highly innovative workers who are going to add value to the company. So if I have a genius in Mauritania or a genius in in Libya, and that genius is going to create the next Teams product for Microsoft. That Microsoft doesn't care if we're there. So I feel like the value from a kind of like a macroeconomic perspective is that you are maximizing or optimizing the allocation of human resources for the demand side of those resources, if that makes sense.
I'm going to just sneak in one final question before we run out of time. I want each of you to put on a hopeful hat and look over the horizon on this. So of the things that are in the offing, or at least a twinkle in somebody's eye, now, what is it you're most excited about in terms of potential future breakthroughs on this, in terms of either the jobs we're training people for, the way we're matching people with jobs, or the way we're doing that training in preparation? Hisham, why don't you start?
Yeah, I'll just be a little bit idealistic over here. It's really, for me, it's a democratization of opportunities across the world, right? And almost like, being able to work, having a worker be anywhere, working for a company that is anywhere either, really, reduces now the degree to which countries would suffer from brain drain, right? And their economies would benefit more directly than through, let's say, remittances. And at the same time, on the other side of the equation, the companies would benefit from the top talent across the world. So you're not limited to looking at talent in your country now, you're looking at talent globally. It's a win-win situation. I think this is, to me, the kind of like the holy grail, that everybody is happy, everybody benefits. So yeah, democratization of opportunity.
From your lips to God's ear. Jennifer?
Yeah, and for me, I think one of the most compelling characteristics of some of these tools is the ability to connect people across difference. So some of the more immediate translation opportunities, the ways that communities can be created online, I think that's one of the most compelling assets that we'll have coming out of, and that I would hope to see be a real, an engine for democratization as well as collective good in an ideal world down the road.
Well, if we were in a physical room, I think you'd be getting a standing ovation right now. Thank you both for a really wonderful presentation. And thanks also to Hisham Jabi for putting this together, and to the Youth Employment Working Group for all the work it's been doing on what I think is a very, very, very important and underattended to issue. I think we moved the needle a little bit today, and I hope we'll stay on these issues in time to come. Thank you all very much to the listeners as well as to the two of you, and I wish you all a good day.